Willow, Season 5, Chapter 3, Chewed Through. Don't you hate it when the skies lie? Okay, maybe I'm being a little harsh. While promising to remain dry, the clouds above Willow were dressed in their finest silver and pewter colors. It was a warning I should have taken to heart as I walked to Horace Mitchell's home. Had I not stayed there for an extra half hour, guided by the widower through his menagerie of pets and random animals, I might have beaten the rain. As it stood, by the time I was but a few blocks from the Mitchell house, the clouds were already shedding their burden on my head. I thought to cover myself by holding the chafing dish I'd gotten back from Horace above me, but let's be serious. How long could I have kept that up? A part of me suggested that I could go back and wait the weather out. After all, it's obvious by the number of animals Horace surrounds himself that he's no friend to loneliness. It would have been a kindness to him, but after his display in the snail room, I thought it reasonable to give him some space. So I called a taxi. I used to take taxis all the time in Montreal. Between those, the subway system, and the inadequate but sufficient bus network, there were few places I couldn't travel at whatever time I chose. Sharing a cab with a handful of the other students from the cooking school after a night out. 4 girls splitting the taxi came to less than a drink's worth and provided comparatively safe travel home from whatever club or pub we'd spent the evening in. Well, that was all well and good for Montreal, where cabs would circle downtown bars, waiting like vultures for fares to poach. Willow is a far smaller place. I think there's perhaps 1 car for the entire municipality, or maybe 2 that trade shifts. Already, the rain had worked itself through every layer of clothing, pooling in deep puddles at the bottom of my sneakers. While a modest downpour, there was enough of the cool spring rainfall to soak me to the bone. A warm bath, I promised my distorted reflection, looking up at me from the cover of my chafing dish. A warm bath and a glass of wine. No, a hot cocoa. You deserve it. The wink I give myself is a mistake, allowing rivulets of water to find their way into my eye, damn near blinding me in the process. Raindrops from my scalp, mixed with traces of conditioner and whatever other cocktail of products I use in my hair, burn my cornea, forcing me to wipe at my eyes. When I blink them open again, it is once more to the sight of the empty streets. Steel clouds reflected on slick asphalt and shiny lakes at every corner remain undisturbed by any car or truck, let alone a taxi. With a sigh, I look around me, desperate for some sort of transportation, or perhaps a little shelter. But this is a residential area, and short of knocking on a random door or seeking refuge under a carport, all I have is the pouring sky above. I frown and purse my lips, squinting a little to get a better look. They'd escaped my attention so far, my focus being on how miserable the cold rain is making me, but I can see them now. They're everywhere, pasted, stapled, and nailed to every lamp post and pole along the street. Homemade posters, all with a variation of the word missing in big, bold letters, always above the photo of some poor animal. Indifferent cats and excited dogs all look up from their sodden signage. Some repeat, but an unsettling number are unique. It's hard, with the rain, to tell how old each of them is, and it's possible they're an accumulation of months, perhaps years, for those protected by plastic sleeves or laminated, of such posters. Curious, I look for animals and names I might recognize. I also try to commit as many of the furry faces to memory, just in case I do notice a familiar puppy or kitten as I go about town. It might be a result of last night's encounter with Odessa and her missing dog, but I stare, mesmerized by the images and phone numbers all around me. I think of the piece of torn leash in my pocket, wondering if you look like a lost mutt yourself, standing around in all that rain. The voice startles me. Even more surprising is how I didn't hear or see the car approaching me in the first place. It's an antiquity, beige and chrome, that managed to slide up behind unnoticed. I know this car well. Not only is it stolen from another time, with a lack of respect for the environment that comes from decades ago, but it also belongs to something of an old friend. "Detective Wilson," I say, a defeated smile drawn on my features. "Fancy meeting you here. Would you be so kind as to give me a ride?" "A ride?" He leans over to unlock the passenger side door. "I'd make a poor servant of the people if I didn't. Hop in." Of all the miracles and mind-bending magics I've witnessed so far during my stay in Aquilo, Wilson's car ranks high among the most unlikely. It's not just the age of it. I've seen vintage cars before, and I'm no stranger to the obsessed hobbyists who take care of them. Collectors of antiquities will pay incredible attention to their possessions, either out of a sense of nostalgia or duty. They fuss over details like I would over the flavor profile of a complex dish. Wilson does none of that. He treats the Chevy Impala like a second-hand ride he just bought and has no plan on keeping beyond the current year. Sure, it looks pristine from the exterior, but the floor is littered with fast food bags and empty cups of coffee, some bearing the Aquilo's logo. The car is an accessory to the great cosplay adventure of Wilson's life, another prop in his delusions of being an old-timey noir detective. He treats it just like that character would be expected to. I place the chafing dish on the back seat and take my place next to the good detective, trying to keep the oceans of rain in my clothes from soaking the car. I don't have to tell him my destination. Still clad in the apron of my profession, chafing dish in tow, it's clear to anyone as observant as Aaron Wilson that I'm going home, or at least to the home of my vocation, back to the Aquilo Cafe. In turn, he doesn't have to ask, but knows that he'll be rewarded for his chivalrous rescue with a generous helping of whatever he fancies to eat and as big a cup of coffee as I can make him. "Hard at work on the case of the missing Fido?" I ask, nudging my chin at the missing posters that cover the lamppost like a dress. It takes a minute for him to reply, allowing for a moment to look at the posters before shifting the car into gear and moving away. His jaw works over something in his mouth. Peppermint mixes with the smell of stale fries and burgers, telling me it's gum he's chewing, though he grinds his face as if it were a wad of tobacco. "It may surprise you to know, Ms. Dufour, that I have other cats to skin before I worry about the neighborhood's negligent pet care. It's spring. Everyone's letting mittens out for the first time in months, or forgetting to close the gate to the backyard before letting their mutts roam free. Isn't that a little cold-hearted?" The question gives him pause, or he puts a show on that it does. He looks through the rearview mirror as if looking for an answer. "I wouldn't be so callous if I hadn't seen it played out every year since the day I became a beat cop. Animals that haven't seen the outdoors since fall lose their minds at the first smell of grass. Careless owners call us because their precious babies have gone missing, only to find them again a month later. Like the seasons, it's a cycle, except this one monopolizes our phone line and distracts our resources." I smile, reading the true story under the detective's frustration. "They're having you investigate a missing pet, aren't they?" The corner of Wilson's lip rises a little, the struggling birth of a weak grin, and he holds up 3 fingers of his right hand. 3, he says. "They're having me investigate 3 missing pets. 2 dogs and a gerbil, who I'm convinced is the victim of foul play. The only witness, which might be the murderer, refuses to cooperate. One of the dogs is Colleen Benjamin's stupid poodle, who disappears every year." I laugh, not at Wilson, but with him. It's a mirth of commiseration, all that experience repurposed into hunting down runaway pets. It's all the more hilarious when contrasted with the detective's thick veneer as a hard-boiled investigator. "Slow month?" I ask, finally forgetting the cold rain a little. "I suppose," he starts with a nod. "I suppose it's better this way. Less glamorous than hunting down a serial killer, but also I sleep a hell of a lot better at night." Without fanfare, we cross the border into Canada. We turn on Rue Principale, driving around Aquilo Border Park. He's right, though. The last few months have been almost normal. Or rather, they've been just as normal as I've allowed them to be. Time spent in the kitchen has been dedicated to perfecting my magic, trying this and that recipe and helping my customers with their little problems. From relieving Mr. Daniel's arthritis with some cupcakes to perfecting a hot tea blend that reduces Josh Tisdale's anxieties, I've been able to do a lot of good. What about the other dog? You said you were investigating 2 missing dogs. Ah, he says, stopping the Impala in front of my cafe. That one. Just got it this morning. Need help with that thing? He means the chafing dish, and I suspect it's just an excuse to follow me in and get his free pastry and coffee, but I can't be bothered with that right now. Is it Puffin? I ask, reaching into my apron pocket. Odessa Ellison's dog? Wilson doesn't need to answer. The arching of his left eyebrow and slow turning in my direction is all I need. He has been assigned to look into Puffin's disappearance. How do you always end up in the middle of investigations, even when it's just about a stupid dog? I do my best to ignore his dismissive attitude. So far, the dogs of Aquilo have been nothing short of fantastic friends and allies. Now, however, is not the time to convince Wilson of that fact. Instead, I pull the piece of broken leash from my apron pocket. The electric blue nylon is sodden now, but the frayed and torn end still tells whatever story it has to tell. Would this help? Detective Wilson sniffles and scratches at his stubble thoughtfully. All part of the act, but I can see the twinkle of curiosity in his eye as he takes the severed leash. I wish he knew that this spark did far more to lend him credibility as a detective than his car, raincoat, and attitude ever could. He picks up the leash, rubbing the tip of his thumb across the damage. His head tilts as if weighed down by thoughts. That's chewed through. Well, mostly chewed through. So Puffin just gnawed his way to freedom? No. The detective shakes his head, handing me the leash back. The last part, here, that was cut. The threads look normal to me until I bring them within an inch of my nose. Then I think maybe I can see what he's talking about. There's a shift in texture, a subtle change in the fibers. It's as hard to distinguish as the difference between rare and raw, but I see it. Wow, good eye. I'm a detective. I know a thing or two about nylon ropes. Circumstances don't allow for much lingering at the cafe. In this case, circumstances refer to the looming threat of pneumonia if I don't get a warm shower and into some dry clothes. Barely do I stay long enough to award Detective Wilson his payment for the timely ride home. I make sure to toss in an extra almond butter brownie as compensation for the puddle I left on his car seat. Fortunately, I'm not the only poor, sodden victim of the shift in weather. A few customers smile from beneath the curtains of wet hair, nodding their empathy towards my situation. Weather like this tends to be good for business. People off the street come in seeking shelter and warmth. I provide the first with a cozy roof and the second with a wide assortment of teas and coffees. Stefan, my sole employee, knows better than to ask me to help with the rush. Just as much as I trust him to handle things in my absence, he trusts me to jump in if I judge the line at the register justifies it. It is tempting to stick around and grab a coffee of my own. Having Stefan combat the machine in my stead wouldn't hurt, and as much as I fear the burns and the steam, that coffee maker makes a hell of a cup. But no, once the chafing dish is back in its place, deep in the cupboard it calls home, I'm on my way up to the apartment above. For good measure, I take a detour to take out the trash. Less to be helpful and more as an excuse to look in on the raccoons in the back. As expected, all 6 of them are huddled in the palace of their garbage bin, piled on top of one another for warmth. A brief pang of compassion washes through me as I watch over their fat little bodies, cowering from the rain. It's a brief feeling, however, cut short when one of the bigger raccoons, the one we call the Don, raises his head to hiss at me. It's all I can do to keep myself from tossing a trash bag at his head before I slam the bin shut. Absolute ingrates, I mumble, struggling to remove my waterlogged sneakers back in my apartment. I'm halfway through taking my shirt off and stringing together another list of insults for the raccoons when I notice Eric standing in the corridor. Hey, if you're gonna need the washroom, you're gonna want to make it now, because I'm making the bath my permanent residence in a minute. No laugh, no chuckle. I don't even get a shrug. He just stands there, hands in the pockets of his cargo pants, staring at the wall. His short, blonde hair looks a little damp, telling me he's been out today. Eric, you good? I poke him with an index finger, the same way I might prod a sponge cake to test how well it bounces back. Still, no reaction. It's as if he met the Medusa out on his walk on the town. Hey, I insist, shoving him a little off balance to force a reaction. Hopefully he doesn't topple over and shatter like a slab of granite. You know who that is? Eric finally asks, breaking his trance but not his fixation. He's scrutinizing one of the many photos that covers the wall of my great-grandaunt's apartment. It's the one where she's catering a baptism, her white, curly hair framing an expression of beatifical joy. She's posing next to a gorgeous 2-layer cake with elaborate pink and baby blue frosting. In the background, blurred by clumsy focus, a couple is doting over a child in a long white lace gown. Doris, I explain, though it feels like I'm repeating myself. Probably not too long before she passed, looking at her. I've already shown Eric the photos. I didn't guide him through the small apartment like a docent explaining each and every piece of memorabilia, but he should know who the old lady is at this point. No, not her. Him. Eric extends his index finger to point at the baby in the background, careful not to touch the glass as he does so, almost afraid it'll shatter should he make contact. I know an expression of reverence when I see one, and I know that Eric keeps those for the rarest of occasions. In fact, if I didn't know better, I'd swear my massive, muscle-clad brother was spooked. I don't know, I shrug, half out of ignorance and half from a chill. Some local kid? Instead of a straight answer, Eric turns to face me. He looks down, eyes wide, his features anemic. He points to his face, then the baby, and then his face again. No. Don't you see the resemblance? His question is sincere despite the absurdity. Maybe if I were drunk... I'm serious, Miriam. He presses, taking my arm in his hand. I've seen this exact photo before. This is my baptism. My muscles hurt, crushed by his enthusiastic grip, but I barely register it. My whole body feels numb, and I fear that, without Eric holding me, I might lose balance. My legs melt from beneath my body as it hits me. That is Eric's baptism. I might have seen the photo in passing twice in my life, glanced at as my parents thumbed through a photo album years ago. It might have been a cropped version back then, or perhaps a different photo taken seconds before or after this one, but there's no mistaking it. The gown, the man's navy blue suit, and Eric's dumb, blank baby expression as he stares at the cake. How many times in the last 2 years have I walked right by this very photograph? Never did I stop to think of it as more than another frame in the comic book page of Doris's illustrated history. Yet there, in the background, looking right back at me, is a character all too familiar. Then those two are, I start, Mom and Dad. The fingers on his hand lessen their grip as I regain my balance. Instead, they crawl across my back, reaching around to my other shoulder, pulling me close. From physical support, my brother has shifted to emotional support, recognizing how far into the abyss I'm thrown. Here. He pulls me along a few feet to his right to face another framed photo. This is what got me curious. It's another shot of Doris. This time she's at a barbecue. The sun is bright and the clouds overhead are a scattered flock of lambs. She's holding a platter of cupcakes decorated to look like multicolored mushrooms. Again, she beams, radiating a joy teetering on the verge of bliss. So broad is her smile that her eyes disappear behind her cheekbones. A gaggle of children gather behind her, wide eyes begging for the cupcakes to be released into their possession. Lone adult in the crowd, a woman that looks to be in her mid-30s, watches over them. "That's Aunt Janice," Eric explains. I squint and do my best to remember, but nothing comes to mind. "We don't have an Aunt Janice. Not that I know of, anyways." "We don't," he confirms. "But we have a second cousin once removed that Mom and Dad told me to call Aunt Jan." "And you remember what she looks like?" Eric shakes his head, pointing instead at a house in the background of the photos. It's nothing spectacular. A 2-story suburban home built in a style from the early 80s. Brown bricks and dark brown shingles framing narrow horizontal and vertical windows. "No, but I remember the house. Mom and Dad took us there a few times, mostly as a place to stop on our way south." "How come I don't remember any of this?" The question isn't a second out of my mouth, and I already know the answer. "I don't know, probably too busy filling your diapers?" I chuckle, but it's with half-hearted mirth. How many, I wonder, how many of these photos hold hidden details of my extended family's past that I never bothered to notice? What other answers might I find if I just spend a little more time putting together the context of each image? If Eric could piece together his memories enough to remember a house he saw when he was no older than 5, what could my parents tell me about all the people Doris posed with? How well do you think Mom and Dad knew her? Doris, I mean. I shiver on the precipice of knowledge, but also at the fear of what I might learn. Or perhaps I'm just cold. "I don't know," Eric says. "They'd have said something by now if they knew her, right?" "Right," I agree, answering like an automaton. "I gotta use the washroom," Eric says, letting me go at last. "I'll run you a bath while I'm in there. You look like a fish that fell out of its tank." I listen to his footsteps, and then the door to the bathroom close behind him. He flips the lock, an old habit from when we shared a roof with my parents, before turning on the tap to the bath. Slowly, I walk back to the baptism photo. With my own kind of reverence, I lay the tip of my fingers atop the glass protecting it, touching the man in the blue suit and his wife holding their baby. Would they have said anything if they knew Doris? The toll of a burdened mind is more often than not paid in slumber. As a student, my burden was usually frustration, rage at my teacher, Chef Gagnon, and anger at my ex-boyfriend for his many transgressions. The loss of sleep was a side effect that I was ill-equipped to endure at the time. Through a year where I needed as much of my faculties as possible, I felt like a zombie, my candle being burnt at both ends. A subtle lesson being a business owner teaches us, and one that has been long and difficult to appreciate, is how to capitalize on that toll. See, it's like reusing pasta water when making sauce, or using the bones of a chicken to make a soup stock. The point is to let nothing go to waste, especially time. With experience, trial, and error, I've learned which tasks I can perform successfully at various levels of exhaustion. So, when my simmering brain won't let me get a complete night's sleep, I know how to use the exhausted morning light to my benefit. If I play my cards right, whatever I get done this morning before the sun goes up is stuff I won't have to do this evening. With a little luck, I'll catch up on the sleep stolen by so many genealogical mysteries. Rolling some dough and chopping some vegetables and fresh herbs is a wonderful way of working out the frustrations that come with not knowing enough. An added bonus is that I'll have some extra delicious samosas for lunch, both a vegetarian and a beef option. Funny how, when my life gets complicated, my customers benefit. I hope none of them ever pick up on that pattern. "Oh, hey," someone calls out as I walk down the steps from my apartment. "You're up early." First of all, that's my line. Second, no one should be up at this hour. This is the time of night when owls make fun of you if you're still up. Unless you're drunk and making youthful mistakes, you have no business walking under the sky. Streetlights still find their reflection in the puddles from yesterday's rain. The town is so quiet at this time that you could hear the alley raccoons arguing if you pricked your ears a little. I have a menu to put together. I answer, fishing for my keys. What in the mother's name are you doing up, not to mention in front of my cafe at this forsaken hour? Annabelle picks herself up from the cool, humid concrete of the sidewalk. By the looks of it, and judging how she stretches her spine, both hands pressed at the small of her back in the process, she's been here for a little while. A shiver goes up her body, ending with a deep yawn. She's wearing some baggy cargo pants and a thick denim jacket, but the pavement must have still found a way to leach the warmth from her bones. Just come in. I don't bother waiting for her answer. Let's get something warm into you. There was going to be coffee anyways. Strong coffee. But instead of one large mug, I pour two. Careful to blow off any excess heat from mine, I take a sip, making a show of how delicious and invigorating the bitter juice is. Annabelle is ready to jump over the counter to get the second mug, but I pull it away. Perhaps it's a little cruel of me, but I've got enough questions using my skull as an arena already. Out with it, I demand before releasing my caffeinated hostage. So, she begins, as if showing up at my cafe before 4 a.m. was something perfectly normal. Turns out that getting home tipsy last night might not have been the best of ideas after all. The pieces fall together on their own from there, a broken glass reassembling itself at the mention of Annabelle's home life. She talks about her family so infrequently that I forget she even has one, not to mention exactly who that family is. Has the good mayor been giving you trouble? I ask, relinquishing the warm mug into her care. She smiles, as if we were discussing something as trivial as the weather or what hockey team won last night's game. Her lips purse around the edge of her drink, sipping the scalding reward. Yeah, she says between swallows. Mom's been on my case about going out too much, which is stupid. I'm not doing the Donselites or anything till fall. No one's partying these days, and with summer on the way, the last thing I need is to get slapped with a curfew. Speaking of which, you have got to come to one of the bonfires Jerry does at his father's farm. I pull myself to sit on the counter across from Annabelle's stool. A street lamp outside flickers, and I notice that the black sky has taken on some bruised tints of purple. There's this trick I learned about people. Sometimes they want to tell you something, or maybe just talk, but they don't know how. I could, and want to, prod her with questions. Dig and nag until I pull out the details of why her parental dispute with Mayor Lagacé sent her to my doorstep before the sun wakes up. But I know that if I wait, she'll eventually spill the beans herself. I know it's going to work because the person who taught me is Annabelle. What I was thinking, she says, making me smile with satisfaction, is that maybe you could bake a little something special into Mom's lunch. Nothing big, just a little spell. A sliver of a glamour. A hint of magic to perhaps suggest that she lay off me. A trust in your daughter spell, if you will. Okay, that is not where I thought this would go. You want me to magically dose your mother's lunch? I ask, incredulous. So you can go out late at night without question? It sounds stupid when you say it like that. Maybe sit on that notion for a second. See how it feels. She sticks her tongue out at me and frowns, burying her face in her mug again. She's just getting more and more overly protective with each year, she complains instead of drinking. Like, the more I need freedom, the less she's willing to give me. I was out with you, of all people. What the hell does she have to worry about? I can't help but chuckle at that. I'm not going to dig too deep into my relationship with Mayor Lagacé. Calling it strained would be a generous evaluation of the situation. However, the idea that hanging out with me, the current magnet for all things dangerous and supernatural in Aquilo, is some guarantee of safety is a punchline in itself. I have scars from a genuine bona fide demon, and I've almost lost my life to monsters at least twice. If I had a daughter, I'd keep her as far away from me as possible. I'm about to say something about it, perhaps mention how Annabelle's mother might have a good cause to keep a close eye on her, when I'm interrupted by a soul-rending cry, followed by a cacophony of banging metal and scratching concrete. 1 second, Annabelle and I are opening up to each other. Then suddenly the back alley has turned into a veritable battleground. Hissing raccoons spit in harmony, so loud that you'd swear they were in the cafe with us. Their cries are loud as barks, making the hair on my arms raise with fear. Even Annabelle, who is usually the picture of cool, drops her mug on the counter, letting it roll off to shatter on the tiles below. "What the hell was that?" she asks, paralyzed in her seat. I don't answer, not with words. What would I even say apart from admitting ignorance? The last time I heard a noise that loud from the back alley, there was a hunger demon on the prowl back there. Olivia had told me that night not to move an inch and not to open the door. I'm a different Miriam now, and while I've seen the face of the threats that prowl the alleys of Aquilo at night, I've also grown to know them better. Besides, how can I leave the raccoons to fend for themselves? Only a few steps still separate me from the back door when all the noises suddenly stop. Silence, raucous, then silence again. "What are you doing?" Annabelle whispers. But I've stopped my daring crusade to help the raccoons. I let the seconds tick, hoping, begging for the incident to be over and for it to have been nothing in the end. 2 raccoons going at it for whatever scrap of meal they might have found. Probably the most natural thing these animals could be doing at this time of night. Except the silence doesn't last. It never does. Instead of banging and hissing, it's the soft yet hurried scratches of tiny claws on the back door. Usually, if the raccoons want entry to the Aquilo, they pick a lock. It's annoying, and I've tried everything over the last 2 years to stop them. We've come to some sort of truce, but I know full well that no lock can keep the trash dwellers out if they set their minds to getting in. What I'm saying is, they never ask to be let in. And that simple fact scares the hell out of me. I cover the last few feet to the door so fast that I can't promise I didn't teleport. Fingers nimble from years of folding pastries and plating delicate dishes scramble to unlock the back door. I swing it open, uncaring and without worry for whatever threat might still be lingering there. All I want to know is what happened to the raccoons. The reality is worse than I could have feared. There are no demons and no monsters. There isn't a girl sitting in a puddle of blood with her intestines missing. Not even anything as mundane as a simple serial killer. Yet, my blood runs cold. "Annabelle," I call out in a whimper. "Where's the closest veterinarian?" Aquilo is written by J.F. Dubow and narrated and produced by me, Amy Frost. If you enjoyed this podcast and would like to hear more, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast platform. Want to support the show? Buy us a coffee. Go to ko-fi.com/Aquilo to donate. Aquilo has a Patreon. Visit patreon.com/Aquilo for details. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram under the username Aquilo.